It's been a couple of years since I've done the whole PowerPoint thing. So first of all, I'm Dr. Beth Macke, and at the table over there is Phil Werry, and we are here to give you a chance to ask questions and talk about some things in a non-crisis mode. Okay, now if you don't think death applies to you for some reason, and I'm not sure why that would be, but let's just go with that. Okay, the knowledge I'm giving you tonight, the questions we discussed tonight, may be useful for a friend, or a sister, or a brother, or your neighbor. So if you're not thinking about dying anytime soon, this information is still helpful. Okay? So I'm the Episcopal priest, well, actually one of the Episcopal priests in town, the other one being Dr. Joanna right now. And we are at the Little White Church, St. Stephen's. And the reason I am here tonight is because I really love having these conversations, much more so in a forum like tonight, than when everything has just hit the fan and you've got to figure stuff out, all kinds of levels on a very short time. So I thank you. Consider this an investment in yourself, your friends, your neighbors. So I called this Having the Last Word, Funeral Planning for Intelligent People, or Things to Know Before You Go. Yes, and you can laugh. That's okay. So a funeral is the chance for the community to gather and for people to say goodbye to their beloved. Now, what I want you to know is that you may think you don't want a funeral, that you don't need a funeral. Well, I'm okay with that, but when parishioners tell me they don't want a funeral, and I know it's somebody dear to the church, I say, okay, fine, but we will have a memorial service for you, and we will celebrate your life. Because if this is your preference, we still need to do that. And so that's why we have funerals. To gather, to say goodbye, to celebrate. Now, funeral planning is very much an act of love for those who follow you. Because there are so many times and places when I meet with either, usually the children at this point, but sometimes it's a spouse, and they look at me with this blank, eye-swollen, tear-filled face, going, I don't know what her favorite hymn was. I don't know what the scripture reading should be. Now, I can do a lot of other stuff, but I can't know that for someone else unless they tell me. So, for example, we had someone who died in the past few years, and I'll just say someone, they may be here, they may be somewhere else, that's all you need to know. It was someone who died. And I sat with their children, and they came in with the Baptist hymnal. Now, there is not a thing wrong with the Baptist hymnal. But this person had been in my pew for 50 years. And the only songs we could agree on were country songs recorded by Elvis. Okay? And that may be just fine for you. If that's what you want, we'll do it. If they're in the hymnal, one of our hymnals, that's no problem. And if it's the postlude, I've done the Master's theme for the postlude. I've done Anchors Away for the postlude. I've done the Marine hymn. But if that's not okay with you, it is up to you to communicate that. Now, on the other extreme, I had a parishioner who died in the past few years. And she not only had a write-up of what she wanted for her service, she had sheet music attached to the back of the write-up and told me which organist she wanted. Okay, I can work with that. Even if I can't get the organist, if I have the sheet music, oh man, it's not a problem. And I can tell you that her child who has lived very far away for a very long time, didn't stand a chance at planning that funeral. Not because he didn't love her, but because it's probably been 50 years since they've been in the same town for a weekend together. So what I'm going to talk about tonight in the few minutes that we have is the purpose of a funeral, the big questions, the how, the where, the when, and who is involved, and the details, gatherings before and after the service, the visitation or the viewing, the order of service. Now, what I'm not going to talk about is the attorney stuff. I'm not going to talk, I have a handout, actually it's on that table, I've got some cards on that table. I've got 4 different worship books from 4 different denominations that were current at the time I bought the books. So I've got the Methodists, the Lutherans, the Catholics, and the Episcopalians back there. If that is not you, you can look through them anyway and kind of find your own corresponding thing to that and look through it. It's really helpful if you look through it. They're beautiful liturgies. They're very important, and the words are very comforting. I'm also not going to talk about the legal stuff because I'm not an attorney. What I am going to tell you is this. I believe in the care and feeding of attorneys and funeral directors. And if you are really serious about what you want, you not only write it down, you pay for it. Because I can tell you that when somebody goes and the heirs or the next of kin have to make a decision between the decedent's bills, the heir's bills, and the funeral expenses, it's just gonna be bad. So the purpose of a funeral is to provide peace of mind for your surviving family members. You probably won't care, all right? I'm willing to put some money on that. Maybe not my last dollar, but I'll put my first dollar down. But the people who surround you need that. It is a human need as much as eating, food, and reproduction. To allow you to have control of your own celebration of life. I had a parishioner a while ago, and none of her family went to the church that I was at. And she wanted to be cremated, and she wanted to be interred in the church grounds. Now, to some of us, we take that for granted, but in this particular circumstance, this was in Georgia, and at the time that she started going to the church, it was just after integration. And so for her to say she wanted to be buried in this church was a big deal. And the family was upset about it because they didn't want her to be cremated, and they didn't want to be buried with all these white folk. But I had it in writing, with her signature. This is what she wanted to do. And this was her beloved church, and she hadn't been in that church for 30 years because she has been homebound, but that's where she wanted to end up. And the only way I could do that was to have that piece of paper in my hand. Purpose of planning is to give you peace of mind, know that this is taken care of, okay? You don't have to go in outrageous details about what I'm going to do with you tonight. You just have to say, it's on this piece of paper. You can put it in your safe deposit box. I'll put it in my refrigerator in the peanut butter jar that doesn't really have peanut butter in it so somebody can get to it, because safe deposit boxes are often not available when somebody dies right away. Here it is. It's done. You don't need to worry about it. Okay, so the big questions, how and where? I love this picture, by the way. Okay, this is St. Stephen's Columbarium, and that's some place that you know. And so ashes, you're cremated, and ashes are interned in these little boxes in this sculpture that looks like a river. This is a relatively new thing. This is actually was started by a former Royal Air Force pilot, and it is the ability to spread your ashes somewhere by drone. Okay, I don't know if Werry's offers that yet, but anyway, just letting you know it's coming. Because one of the things that people want their ashes spread from the air, the FAA frowns upon containers being thrown out of airplanes. And people are often so emotional when they do it, they can't hold on to the container. And we can laugh about it now, but if you injure somebody with my urn, I'm going to come back and haunt you. Okay? So he has actually designed this drone that has this box that comes open. And so he can spread ashes over farmland. He can spread ashes over ocean. In the U.S., you have to be 3 nautical miles out. It is illegal to scatter ashes on beaches. But if you go 3 nautical miles out, you're okay, according to the EPA. And please don't let your children get arrested doing your honorable thing. Pay for the boat ride. Okay. So, cremation or casket, you can do both. And then there's this new thing called aquamation. Has anybody else heard of aquamation? Okay. Well, let me tell you about this. The people who make the devices for aquamation are located in Danville, Indiana, but it is illegal in the state of Indiana. However, it is legal in Illinois. Aquamation is a low carbon footprint alternative to cremation. Cremation uses a lot of energy because the oven has to get really hot. Aquamation uses much less energy. It only goes to 300 degrees. And the technical name is alkaline hydrolysis. And you can look that up if you like. Archbishop Desmond Tutu actually chose this option because it was better for the environment. Okay, it's not legal yet. And the legislators have to make it legal. Nobody else can do that. Like Mr. Werry can't just say, okay, it's okay to do this in Posey County. So don't give him grief about that if you don't have that option yet. But just know that these things are available. And I can tell you that in my own planning, I have not paid for my funeral expenses yet. We're in discussion of that right now, and I'll get to that later in the presentation. But if aquamation is legally available where I am, that is probably what I will choose to do as opposed to cremation. Okay, so you can be cremated and still have a viewing. So you can rent a casket and have a viewing if that's something that needs to happen, and then you can be cremated. Okay, so that's not an either-or situation. And if your checkbook can stand it, you can do just about anything you like. Okay, donation to science. We've heard about that, and some people kind of say, oh, well, I'm just going to donate my body to science so I don't have to pay for all this stuff. Okay, first of all, in the state of Indiana, you have to apply beforehand and be screened. Your body cannot just show up. Okay? And then after you go, there's still another screening process. So just while that is a very honorable option, know that you can't decide it 24 hours before you go. Okay, so where should it be? Now, for those of you who are wandering nomads and you may have a house here and a house there, okay, you just need to talk to somebody about whatever happens wherever you happen, because even if you are right here, you go visit some relative somewhere else and something happens to you while you're visiting, you're still going to need somebody somewhere else to make the bridge back here. So what I'm saying is, if you're, not sure where you're going to be, I'm not going to say it's a cop-out, but I'm going to say it can be dealt with. Okay, so visitation. Some people like visitation, some people don't like visitation. If the family and the loved ones need visitation, you know, the night before and then the morning of, that's great. Just don't make visitation so long that you've got another death to deal with before the funeral. And one of the biggest challenges I have had in visitations, because I'm usually at the beginning of a visitation, so, is making sure that the family members eat and drink enough water while they're standing in the line. And then to do it again the next day. It's very difficult. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be considerate. So like in my own plans, I've got an option for evening visitation, but if the people who follow me don't wish to do that, then there'll be a morning visitation and then the service. Okay, so the service. And when I say service, I mean whatever ritual you deem appropriate. Because of where I come from, we call it a service. We actually call it the burial office. If you're Methodist, you call it the service of death and resurrection. If you're Lutheran, you may call it burial, and if you're Catholic, you call it the burial mass. Okay, so it's all some kind of ritual. And there's decisions to be made there. So what kind of service and how are the people attending the service going to deal with it? So one of the things, like we have an option for communion. And one of the things I will discuss with the family, or preferably with the person in pre-planning, is, you know, who do you think is going to come? Because if it's a bunch of people who don't do communion, unless this is really important to you, I can't recommend it. Because it just puts people at an awkward time in an even more awkward situation because they don't know what to do, and no matter how hard you try to explain it, they're not listening because they're grieving. And it can be, I wouldn't say a nightmare by any stretch, but you know your people. Know what would work. Okay. People want, oh, I want to sing hymns. Great, do you have anybody to lead the hymns? Well, no, I just want to sing hymns. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Because I'm going to bet that your grandchildren probably have never sung out of your hymnal. And they don't know these words. I'm lucky if the grandchildren know the Lord's Prayer these days. That's just how it is. I'm not making a moral evaluation. I'm just telling you that's how it is. More and more people don't know how to behave at a visitation. People don't know how to behave at a funeral. I've even had a couple experiences where the visitation next to me, they had to call the police on because there was a fight at the visitation at the funeral home. Because they don't understand that when you walk into a funeral home, you're supposed to leave everything else there and focus on the grieving person. And so these things happen. Okay, live streaming or recording. Before the pandemic, we didn't have to have this discussion unless you were being buried out of the National Cathedral and you were a former president. But now we do. So, do you want it recorded? Do you want it live streamed? Are you willing to pay extra for that? Because I can tell you, we have volunteers on Sunday morning who do it, but getting them is like getting our non-existent alkalites now, just because of their schedules, okay? So if that's something that you think needs to happen because you have people who will not make it under any circumstance, you have people who are in different time zones and cannot get here, there are really good reasons for live streaming or recording it and making it available. Those are two very good reasons. Or there's another pandemic, or, it snows, or it floods. Those are really good reasons. But know that there's some extra things that have to happen there. Okay? Things like music copyrights, things like poetry copyrights. If you want the poem The Dash read at a funeral or part of a sermon and it is recorded, it is a copyright violation that is heavily defended. Do you know the poem I'm talking about? The dash, it's what you do between the dash that matters, not the end year or the... Anyway, it was written by somebody, and she heavily defends her copyright to it. Okay. Transportation and interment of the body or ashes. There is paperwork required. Okay, you can't just get up and take a body from point A to point B. Now, that makes sense to you, I think, but it's kind of the same thing with ashes. Ashes are human cremains, and you have to have paperwork in order to take them from one place to another. Funeral directors do the paperwork. Now, you can I actually checked into this. You can take ashes on an airplane, either checked or on board, but they cannot be in a container that cannot be x-rayed. So these lovely metal urns, you will not be able to take those ashes on a plane if they cannot scan them. So put them in a cardboard or plastic container that can be x-rayed. Take the fancy urn that's openable so they can see inside of it. You'll be fine. Okay, so make sure it is legal, whatever you do. Now, I've actually got a copy on the back table of the cremation and burial laws in Indiana off the NOLA website. I would, if you're interested, even if you're not interested, if you're thinking, oh, I want to do this, you might want to read them. There's some kind of quirks, and it's very state specific. What I have is only applicable to Indiana at the time I printed it. Okay, always have a plan B. We have had a number of parishioners die under circumstances and the family couldn't get here for months, or the preacher couldn't get here, or somebody else couldn't get here. Somebody, it's kind of like weddings. Everybody loves a wedding in the roofless church. Well, you can pick your wedding date with better odds than you can pick your funeral date. In fact, lawyers will tell you, yeah, I'll be glad to write you the perfect will. Just tell me exactly when you're going to die, and we can get it done. So understand that if you want an outside service, or if you want a service in a small church and the church is not available, just talk about what your wishes are, and I'll talk about that when I do my example. Okay, so what type of gatherings before and after the service? So you've got people coming in who are grieving, who are probably hurried, who probably got in the car at the last minute, who probably forgot at least 4 things that they were supposed to bring. So give them some slack. Don't expect them to be ready before, 2 hours before visitation for a private meal or something like that. Be laid back about it. Make sure there's food. The funeral homes and family are really good at making sure that you have water and some food in some funeral homes. But, they've driven for 6 hours and you want them to stand for 4? Somebody could pass out on that, and it's just really not helpful. So what about after the service? It's typically been the function of churches to provide bereavement meals, but as people are getting further and further away from churches, that is not happening so much anymore. And even at St. Stephen's, we tell you, if you're going to have a funeral with us, the family pays for the meat. We will bring the sides, but we will no longer pay for the whole thing, because that's the way we can best use our resources. For me, my after gathering, if there's a church that wants to do something that's great and lovely, if that doesn't happen, I'm actually putting in my funeral plans that I want so much money set aside so that my dear friends and family can go have a margarita in my honor. Okay? And You can say that. I had a family one time, she was really into cocktail hour, and a very jet setter lady, and this is nobody here in New Harmony. Well, I mean, there are people like that in New Harmony, but I'm not talking about anybody I've buried out of New Harmony. Let me put it that way. Anyway, so the family decided that they would schedule the burial as late in the day as the city would allow them to pay for it. And so they went back and had cocktail hour. Now, we don't need any more drinking, driving, and accidenting after a funeral. But I'm just saying to you, it doesn't have to be fried chicken if you don't want it to be, or if you don't think it's an appropriate thing for your family. Okay, so what type of service? I talked about that a little bit. I talked about communion, no communion. You know, do you want people to speak? Do you want an open mic? Some people don't. And if you don't, then say so. Say, I want these people to speak, or I just want the preacher to speak. Okay, so readings. Do you want poetry? Do you want scripture? Do you want, things passed around? There's all kinds of things that you can do that's meaningful, but nobody else can read your mind is what you would want to be done unless you tell them. Okay, music. Some music's copyrighted, some music's not. If you want music, we are having fewer and fewer musicians, particularly organists. And we don't have an organist anymore at St. Stephen's, so we have to bring somebody in and we have to make sure they're available. And if that's what you want, then think about that. Now, if you're married to my husband hates organ music. He says, if you put organ music at my funeral, I will come back and haunt you. So, it's on his funeral plan. No organ. Okay, so there's during the service, there's before and after the service. So you might have one standard of music during the service, but you might have other music before and after. Like, I allow people to do stuff for the postlude that, like, I would not put the Masters golf theme in the service, but I'm perfectly okay having it as the postlude, which is the music that happens immediately after the service is over. Okay, so who? So who should be the master of ceremonies? Do you want a minister? Do you want somebody else? And understand you need to have a plan B for this one too. Okay, spoken parts, readers. Do you want grandchildren to do something? Do you want siblings to do something? Do you want to say somebody else? Is there anybody that I need to know about that is in a fight with anybody else in your family? And when I'm planning the funeral, we'll fight over this too? That's really helpful information for the priest to know. Okay, so ushers and other services. There's lots of things to be done at a funeral. You got to have somebody that needs a job to be part of the action. The grandchildren, I always have grandchildren give out bulletins. They're great. My rule for people who read is that I ask that they be able to read the whole scripture without crying. They can cry before, they can cry after. And if I don't know them, I actually have them rehearse. Because the point is the scripture. And I understand people are grieving, and I want them to cry. But I don't want somebody exuding body fluids all over the microphone that somebody else has to get up and do something else immediately after. Okay, so musicians, I've gone through that. Eulogists, single or multiple. Really famous people have multiple eulogists. They're mostly equipped speakers. Okay, but think about who you want. Because if you've got somebody who wants to talk all night about your golf score, guaranteed there's going to be some other people especially the people who put the food together, really mad, and you will never live it down. There's a story, actually, and I don't even know whose funeral it was, but it sticks in my mind. There was a preacher who went on with the service so long, the American Legion were supposed to do a gun salute, and they came down, and she wasn't done with the service yet, so they went back to the Legion Hall, and then they came down again. Evidently, one of their blanks went off on one of the trees. But so be kind to the people who are doing it, be kind to the people who are attending. And the old Catholic tradition, Irish tradition, is to have a wake the night before the funeral, and that's where everybody gets out their appropriate beverages, their popcorn or whatever, and talks all night. And I think that's wonderful, and I'm sorry we don't have it, because then we try to cram it into the 3 minutes in the funeral, and it doesn't work very well. Okay, so you need permission to live stream, to use recorded music, and to read poetry or some particular readings. Know about it beforehand. Okay, other donations. In lieu of flowers is how some obits read. This is an opportunity to do something about something you care about, but if nobody knows what you care about, they can't do it. And so we had a funeral in the past 3 years where the standard obituary said, in lieu of flowers, you can plant a tree. That's a pretty common thing these days. And so I actually had people call me at St. Stephen's and say, we really love this guy and love his family. We want to plant a tree. And I had to say, well, we at St. Stephen's don't need any more trees on our property. And of course, they were in Chicago. What do they know? They just saw it on the obit. They wanted to do the right thing for the obit. So I said, okay, so would you like to make something that's a legacy for the church? And so they got together, and they got together $1,000, and as a result of that $1,000, I have these beautiful Holy Week vestments that I can wear, and for Pentecost, and for the Feast of St. Stephen, which is red, and they got them together. And if we had never had that conversation, a non-tree would have been planted at St. Stephen's. Similarly, person dies here, the siblings who live elsewhere, they don't know what they're... And I actually had a suggestion for a place in the Northeast. I'm like, has she ever been there? Does she even know the name of this place? So this is a chance to make a difference about something you care about. You know, when Mick died, he had an in lieu of. It was the playground. And that was really important. It's really important to the community. And good for him. And good for us. Okay, the obituary. Obituaries are getting really expensive to publish in the newspapers, even more expensive and sometimes almost impossible. So where they usually end up are on the website. Now, there are fights about who gets to write the obituary. So the best thing for you to do is to write your own, have your say, put it down, and hand it to the funeral director. Okay? When my husband met the funeral director, they went through everything, and he said, well, what about the obituary? And they sat down and they wrote my husband's obituary while he was there in consultation. I don't have to do it. I am really grateful because I'm going to be busy if he precedes me. Picture for the bulletin or for the funeral home. This is really a hot issue as well, and it's best picked out by the person whose picture it belongs to. Some people fight over this. Some people can't find the picture. Some people find out that a whole lot of other stuff is gone besides the picture they're looking for. And this is not the time to do this. Just pick one. And if you don't want a picture of a face, fine. Pick a picture of a beautiful scene. That can go on the website. Pick a picture of your home. Pick a picture of something else. Sign-in book. Okay, as people are going, I want to say this nicely. There's a whole industry that parallels the funeral director industry that offers stuff at discounted services. It offers services at a discount. And one of the things that they usually don't do is a sign-in book. And the family has no idea that a sign-in book wasn't included. And I have had more than once just get out a piece of paper, get out a paper pad for people to sign in so that people knew who came. Now, this may not be important. You family may not want to know who comes. More than likely they will, because when you're grieving, it's really hard to remember all the names. Engraving on the headstone or marker. Now, depending on where you go, and if your ashes are scattered, I don't know what you do on that. Maybe you put it on a plaque below. But, that's something you should pick out too. Because you want what you want, right? It's going to be there a long time. Hopefully forever. Payment. I can say this because I'm not him. Funerals are expensive. Funerals are very expensive, and they will never get cheaper. So if you love the people around you, figure it out. Because when somebody goes, I've had situations where the next of kin didn't think they had any money, so they went with some really lowball operation, and it had ripple effects. I've had situations where the heirs, next of kin, knew they had money but couldn't get to it because of the legal stuff. Okay, the only way to ensure that you have this done is to take care of it now. Okay. Things I'm not going to talk on: advanced directives, living will, all that good stuff. These are state specific. If you move, you should get a new state's forms. Estate planning. Like I said, I believe in the care and feeding of attorneys. Okay, and then I have the laws pertaining to burial and cremation in Indiana in the back. Okay, so here's my example. This is my funeral. So my funeral is going to be a right to service, remains present in church, ashes, and then I want to have the services conducted at the church proximate to where I've served. So there's this discussion about which church I'll be at, because I don't know which church I'll be at, and I don't know which church is going to be able to hold the number of people that show up. And maybe nobody will show up, and maybe it'll just be in a little chapel, but I don't know that. All right, so my clergy presider, my first choice is my bishop. That's a no-brainer because I'm a priest and I take vows to the bishop. But I didn't put a name there. I said bishop. Because the bishop can designate somebody if the bishop's on sabbatical or we're between bishops or something like that. So a lot of times people will put down, I want the minister at such and such church, but they don't put a name. Or they put, I want this person or their designee. So here's my scriptures. Here's my hymns. Here's my Eucharistic prayer C, and I have a spelling error. That should be guitars, if possible. Okay? There may not be anybody playing guitar by the time I go, but I would like that. So I've said it. Okay, and then this is my signature, and that's a witness, and then I have other instructions so they have a reception slot, and I have not put my margarita extravaganza in there, but I will. And then other instructions, inter at Holy Innocents Episcopal Church. Here's the address, Atlanta, Georgia. And I've already paid for that part. So no matter where I go, my ashes are going to end up on Mount Vernon Highway at Holy Innocents Church. Now, they may get sent by the United States Postal Service. They will send ashes. You just send them registered mail. And I'm fine with the staff on Tuesday going out to the garden and burying me, just, quiet few moments of silence and some prayers, and then going on. My official goodbye is the service up there, okay? The rush hour traffic to try to get to Holy Innocents is just incredible. And I don't want people risking their lives to drive there, but that's where I'm gonna go. So, other details. So my in lieu of is not on here. I've got to put that on there. Sign-in book. I would like to have a sign-in book at the church. Engraving. My name just in the death year, birth year, go on a plaque that's on the wall. That's it. The location of my ashes are not even marked in this particular parish. And I'm okay with that. And then I've paid for it. Okay, final thought. Everybody wants to go to heaven, have a mansion high above the clouds. Everybody wants to go to heaven. But nobody wants to go now. And that's one of my favorite theologians, Kenny Chesney. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Werry, and he's going to give you an opportunity to ask some questions, or talk, and then ask some questions. Are there any burning questions you have? I'll be here for refreshments. I've got books over there. I've got cards over there. I'm not drumming up funeral business, okay? This is not what I'm doing. I'm doing this because I care, and this is knowledge that I have, and I think it's important. Any burning questions? Okay. Well, with that, I will turn it over. Thank you for your attention.
I'm a fifth-generation funeral director in our family. A little history about our funeral home. Started in the late 1890s in a little town, Tennyson, Indiana, which is northwest of Boonville. It was my great-great-grandfather and grandmother, John and Sarah Campbell Billups, started the business. And they did not have any sons, and at the time, funeral directors were men. These days, there are a lot of women directors now. And they had 4 daughters, and one of the daughters was Eleanor Billups Werry, which some of you may remember her. She was a resident at the Ford home out here for years and years. And I'm not sure what year she died, but she was quite a character, and she lived just short of 100 years, and she was in the funeral business for just short of 100 years because she always wanted to know what was going on, got any work on. Anytime I talked to her, they'd just say, that's what she wanted to say, got any work on. So she lived the whole time through it, and like that from back in the 1890s. From there, her husband is Philip Charles Werry. They call him PC. They started a partnership and moved into Boonville. And that continued until about 1920. And at that time, they moved to Poseville and established the funeral home in Poseville. Not where it's at right now. It's right where the bar is right now in town. So that's where we started. It was a storefront. and then they moved on into the location where the funeral home is right now. Their son, Chester Werry, my grandfather, I'm sure some of you remember him. He was quite a character. He told so many stories, he forget how he told them. So it'd be different each time. But he and his wife, Ruth, she became a funeral director also. And then came my dad, James Philip Werry, and they built this location here in 1957. And in the 60s, they bought out Bixler Funeral Home in Cynthiana and started that location up there. The funeral arrangements, what we end up doing, and I'm going to pretty well just go through the process of making arrangements. And like Beth says, if you want it, we can do whatever you want, as long as you won't pay for it. And that's the big deal out there. Some people think that they're entitled to stuff, but we'll do whatever we can legally. And they talk about some of these copyright laws. It's unbelievable what we have to deal with. Some of the information that we ask for that some people don't know, or that it's not on top of their mind, is well, of course they'll know the decedent's date of birth, their occupation, their social security number. A lot of times we need their social security number, and their card preferably, because sometimes people will use an initial and then their name and like that, but that's not the way it's put on their social security number. It'd be the full name like that. And when we try to send it electronically to the Social Security Administration, we have all kinds of problems. So if you can come up with a social security card, it solves a lot of problems with that. If they were in the military, we need to know their military records, because you have benefits that a military person receives at the funeral. They receive a flag, they receive a tombstone, and they receive the right to have a military funeral. If you were a disabled from the military service like that, what you receive from that is more, and it's just dependent upon what the Veterans Administration allows for its different things. So what everybody gets is not necessarily the same. And funny, one of the things that we ask about is their parents' names. But many times you'll be sitting there, you're making an arrangement on your parents, and we ask what their parents' names are. So in other words, your grandparents' names and the mother's maiden name. Sometimes that's hard to think of right off the top of the head. It's not always the easiest thing. Maybe everybody does know them, but I've had several come in that we had to call Uncle Joe or somebody to find out who it is. Social Security. We file that electronically when we file the death certificates. And if you have a surviving spouse or a surviving dependent, you will receive the grand total of $255 from the Social Security Administration. And I've been doing this for 40 years, and it's been like that for that 40 years. So you go on with that's all that I have for that. Veterans benefits. As I mentioned before, what they are, there's more benefits for those people who are on pensions. What we have to file for a lot of this stuff is an honorable discharge, and need the report form that they receive when they're discharged, the DD-214. And that has all their military history on it. When they joined, when they were discharged, what their birth date is, what their serial number is, and all that information like that. That is what some of the information we need. Other personal documents that we don't necessarily need, but when you're making a planning for their funeral and stuff like that, share the information with your spouse or your kids or somebody you can trust. Like, where's your bank at? What bank you bank in? Where's your checkbooks? The deeds to your real estate, stocks and bonds, where do you have invested at? Your military certificate I talked about earlier about the DD-214, a will. This day and age, with all the privacy things that go on like that, one of the things that if you go to get your death certificate from someone who's passed, they just don't give them to anybody. You got to prove who you are. So if you're for your parents, you have to provide your death certificate, your birth certificate to prove who you are. You know, it may be you have to provide your marriage license to them and all. But there's all kinds of legal documents that I know I have all mine put away, and I don't know if Janet knows where all that stuff is. But it's just hard to get a hold of some of the information, and they have to go dig and dig to find it for different things. One of the things that I can pass along to you all on insurance and life insurance policies. On each life insurance policy, there's 3 designations on them: the owner, the beneficiary, and the insured. And the most important one is the owner of that policy. And the owner of that policy, that is part of your assets. If you get up in years and you go to a nursing home and you've been there for a while, it puts a big draw on all your cash reserves. And if you want, you can take your insurance policy, and you don't have to own your own insurance policy. As long as somebody has an insurable interest, your spouse, your kids, your business partners, anybody has that insurable interest can own a insurance policy on an individual. Okay? My mom and dad say, well, they make it out to me and they go to the nursing home. Well, that's not part of their assets anymore. You go to the nursing home, they end up going on Medicaid. They make you spend down to $1,500 is all you can have. Well, what's that leave for anything else? Well, you can preserve that by making someone else that you can trust the owner of those policies, and it's not your assets any longer.
So is there a time period that
Usually there's about a 5-year look-back period.
before you go into?
Yeah. It was 2 years, and I think they've changed it to 5 now. So, cremation. Beth talked about on a lot of that. She showed the picture of the drone spreading ashes in the air. It says, scattering cremains by air. Where there's no state laws on that matter, federal aviation laws do prohibit the dropping of object that might cause harm to people or property. The U.S. government does not consider cremated remains to be the hazardous material. All should be well so long as you remove the cremains from the container. Don't drop it on their head. But the FAA wants to control that. And you said that was from who had that? From
law organization. I have.
From what country though?
From the United States.
I was saying you mentioned the Royal something or other.
Oh, that was the UK. That was Great Britain.
Yeah, so, they have different laws. Each state has different laws on what you can and can't do with the cremation, the cremains, and the regulation got to be cremated. There's a whole list of things we must do before we can be cremated because it's pretty final. do the wrong one, you're in trouble. And it has happened, yes.
Can you divide up cremains, like if you want part of you to go one place and part
Yes,
of you,
yes.
you can do that? Does the funeral?
Usually we do that.
Okay.
We get them from the crematory, and then we divide the remains at however they want to do it. They make little memento urns that a lot of times that they put, the teaspoonful of ashes in it. And some divide them 50-50. There's all different kinds of ways now that what people want to do with them.
Hey, Phil,
Yes.
that DD, whatever it is, and your social security cards, can you have copies of those?
Just bring them in. The DD2, it's dog 214.
I was thinking if you want to give copies to your kids.
Yeah, copies work.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't make any difference to that. It's just the information we need off of it. Typically what I do, they bring in, I make a copy and send the originals back with the families on that. Really, I don't have a whole lot else to say. If anyone's got any questions, any more questions? Yes.
So can you kind of walk me through the steps? If I get dead tonight, Peggy calls you and says, Tim's dead. Assuming you can't. I'm here. Come on, get me, and she wants me, I want to get cremated. You send me over to the creamer, they take it from there.
I assume that you say that, this is not an unexpected death.
I'm expecting to get dead sometime.
Well, but like I say, being unexpected, you have to deal with the coroner and stuff like that. But if it's, you've been sick and you die there at home, you call us and we'll take care of everything. All we got to do is we come in, we have to go through the proper paperwork, get the death certificate, get the doctor's, get it signed, the application sent to the doctor. He has to sign it. It has to be filed with the health department, and then we fill out the proper forms that we take to the crematory to have that done. We take them and get it done, and then we go from there.
Then you pick up the cremers.
Yes. Yeah, you don't have to. We take care of it all.
And I don't mean, this stuff happens. What happens if I just wake up dead? It's just,
Well, if it's an unexpected one, then more likely they'll end up calling the ambulance, and they'll go through it, and then the coroner will be involved. And if it's a very surprising death, there may be an autopsy and stuff like that. But from that point on, we'll get the body and taken, and the procedure will be the same from then on. But as I say, we had to have the coroner sign the certificate instead of the doctor.
thank you.
Elisa?
I was going to ask about the number of plots that are available.
Not very many.
When you say not very many.
Well, there's a lot of empty graves out there. A lot. But there's very few that are not owned by someone. They went in and bought a dozen graves. Well, there's 4 people there, so we got 8 empty graves there. Well, there's nothing we do about it. I've been searching around out there, and every now and then I'll find some other graves out there. But there's not many, and if there's 50, that would be a surprisingly high number for me. But there may be 1 here and maybe 2 here and there. It's not easily found.
So if we want to be buried there, we need to be.
Yes.
Well, along that line, what are the laws in Indiana about multiple people in the same plot?
Most of that is left to the cemetery rules, where they have to, the cemeteries make a determination of like that. And out here, this cemetery, they'll allow more than one. They'll allow 2 ash burial in 1 grave, or a traditional burial with its ashes on top of it. 2 decedents. Some cemeteries don't allow that, and typically those are the ones that are owned by big corporations. And let's talk about money, because if I put 2 in 1 grave, I don't get to sell a grave. Out here, it's totally opposite out here. We need a place to put them, and the cost of the grave is not a big deal. Yes, Connie.
What the cost of a lot is?
Out here, it's $750 per grave. So, if no one else has any questions, thank you. Yeah.
You said, since I'm married to a veteran, you said they get a great, they get a stone?
Yes. Most of out here, they use these bronze plaques. They're 2 foot by 1 plaque. Yeah. You can get a stone, but it's the old style. Like when you go to the National Cemetery, you'll see the one that it's just straight up and down. It's about this wide and tall.
Would be room for my name on there?
Huh?
Would be room for my name on there?
No, you wouldn't get your name put on it. But a lot of them, that they do is they buy a standard granite stone, and I'm speaking about when there's a spouse, involved here. They'll have both names, and then we'll mount on the back side, put the veterans marker on the back side of it. And I recommend that because there's several of them where they're on the ground. Well, the lawnmowers run over top of them, trucks run over top of them, step on them, the grass encroaches on them and everything, and they don't look as nice. And you have them on the back out there, and they stay looking much nicer for much longer period of time.
Do you ever send veterans over to Jefferson Barracks?
Excuse me?
Do you ever send deceased veterans over to Jefferson Barracks for the National Cemetery?
Let's see, Jefferson Barracks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've had one over there. We've gone to Arlington. There's one in Madison, Indiana. The one in St. Louis.
Is that a free thing then?
I don't hear real well, so.
Is that a free free plot in a stone?
I'm trying to think what I just read about that. I don't think they are free. And there's a whole application process to get into one of the national cemeteries anymore. So, if you're thinking about that, you almost have to make plans well in advance to get that taken care of.
I know at the time my dad died, he's in the National Cemetery in San Antonio, and everything was free there, But that was way back in '91.
Well, and they may still be now. We just don't deal with it. I've been at it for 40 years, and there's only a handful of times we've been in, and each one of them are probably a little different.
Yeah.
Last chance.
So, I know somebody that's burial had been prepaid, life insurance is switched over and everything. They no longer live in that area. Is there a way of transferring that?
Yes.
Is there? Okay.
Yes. And I'll talk about it, and that was one of the things I was going to, but pre-need stuff. You can come in and take care of all your financial stuff at the funeral home and don't have to worry about anything on that. We're not the state of Illinois, which went broke from politicians over there, but the funeral bill is divided up, and you go in and you make your funeral arrangements just as if it was an at-need. We get all the information, and like this, you pick out whatever you want, what service you want, and everything, and we make out a bill for what it is. And the funeral bill is made into 2 sections. Part of it is the funeral home's charges, and part of it is what we call cash advance items. Those are things that are charged by other people, like the cemetery, the digging of the grave, minister, flowers, death certificates. And the part that's the funeral home's bill is 100% guaranteed forever. The other part is not guaranteed like that, but you draw interest on your money. So it's not like I can put my money in the bank and draw interest. We pay the same thing, same rate that the interest is, so you can get that. So if you come in, take care of the whole thing, all you have to do is, it's usually just a very minor couple $100 is all it ends up being as a difference, because you get your interest on your cash advance items, and we figure that in, and then what the difference is what you have to pay. The funeral home part, you don't have to pay anything on it.
Is this written down somewhere that is it on our website or something like that we could refer to all the different things that are needed, that we would need to have?
Our website has a lot of this information on it, and you can get through it. But you know, if any questions, just set up an appointment, come in. You don't have any obligation to it, but we can walk you through everything you need to know. Everything that Beth talked about up here, it's not gone into great detail because that's not part of my thing. But you know where you want to have your funeral, what minister you want to have, and obviously, like she spoke, it's best not to put down Joe Blow as your minister, because if he's a Methodist minister here, 5 years from now, he may not be. We could put down the Methodist minister, Episcopalian minister, or something like that. So. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
We'll adjourn for refreshments. I apologize for the misspelling of the name. I thought I caught that, but evidently I didn't catch it on the final one. But anyway, thank you for coming. Thank you for being open to this discussion. And I hope it was helpful. There are some refreshments. We're both available for questions. You know where we are. You know where we work. And thank you.
Thank you.